welcome to The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Ralph Russo from The Athletic, joined today by my colleague Stuart Mandel. Bruce Feldman is taking a little break, and who am I to complain, because I've barely been here for the last month. So it's just Stu and I today. We will hit the mailbag, of course, because it's that time of the week for that. We will talk a little bit about some coaching contracts being extended. But first and foremost, coming off of, and the last show we did was before the national championship game in March Madness, before the men's game. Michigan wins that. The Big Ten is on a heater. It's won the football championship. It's won men's basketball, and it won women's basketball this weekend. Stu wrote a little bit about why so much success for the Big Ten right now? So we're going to talk about that before I throw it to Stu in his column. And then we'll get into a little broader discussion of just circling around back to football and why the Big Ten is the best conference or maybe not be the best conference. So Stu, it's been a while since we had a chance to talk. What's going on?
Big week for the Big Ten. No question about that. I thought it was a pretty remarkable stat. They were the first. The SEC did that once when Florida was humming. Doing those three, but Florida had two of them. This is the first time a conference has had three different schools win those national championships in the same year. And even going further than that, Ralph, right? Like two of them, Indiana in football, UCLA women's basketball, had never won the national championship. So, and Michigan hadn't won in a long time, right? I think there's no secret. College sports has changed considerably over the last 4 years. I don't think that's underselling it. It's changed almost completely in the last 4 years. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that the Big Ten's new stretch of prosperity coincides with that. But the question is why? And I don't think the simple reflexive answer is, well, they have the most money, right? You can buy players now and they have the most money. I just don't think it's that simple because they've always had the most money. Like they've got the biggest fan bases, the most TV eyeballs. The numbers are bigger now, obviously, for everybody. But it's not like the SEC is broke. I think the difference in distribution from the conference to the teams is like $3 million per year between those conferences. So I started, kind of thinking about it a little more. It's like, well, obviously money is a starting point for everything now, but it still matters who your coach is and how they deploy it. And I think Curt Cignetti in football and Dusty May in men's basketball are kind of the personification of the new age coach. I think it's notable not just that they tapped into the portal the way they did and that they, got the right guys, right? I mean, it's not just, Kentucky spent a lot of money on transfers. That didn't do them much good. And they just full on embraced it. I just think over the last 4 years, so many coaches have whined and complained that they don't like the way it is now. Players have no loyalty. They're only picking their schools on money. Hey, all those things might be true. It's irrelevant. Do you want to win or not? You got to embrace the new system. And as I started kind of thinking back, I think the SEC has had a higher share in football of the complainer types, right? I mean, Nick Saban flat out retired because he didn't want to deal with this, right? Dabo Swinney, not in the SEC, but in that part of the country, just tried to die on that hill and paid the price. Brian Kelly, remember, it was only the year before last that he kind of went on the pulpit and said, we're not going to buy players here, right? Good luck with that. So great hires. And so I guess when I just said earlier that, the sport has changed completely, it has in terms of how you build your rosters. But I think one thing that hasn't changed is the importance of nailing your head coaching hire. And those two schools, Indiana in football and Michigan in basketball, certainly did.
All right, let's hit a couple of things here. The elephant in the room, of course, is, and you hit on this, Stu, we hear this a lot. It's overly simplistic, but I also think there's a modicum of truth to it. Well, the SEC has always been paying players. Now that everybody can pay them, it's evened out, right? Probably a little of that. But again, as you hit on, I don't totally believe that the SEC is the only place that was bending rules when it comes to paying players and getting money to players. So again, modicum of truth there. but maybe not the whole story. A little bit of an oversimplification. I also think it's interesting, though, when NIL became legal, when paying players became legal, what you did hear out of the Big Ten was a little bit more, well, we're slow to adapt up here. We're not 100% comfortable. We heard it from, and we would hear it behind the scenes and in on the record at times. Our donors, our people, they hear paying players and they recoil a little bit. So I think a lot of the Big Ten schools, and this goes right to the very top, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, were a little slow to onboard the NIL piece of it and paying players. Whereas I think some of the SEC schools, Tennessee comes to mind, Texas A&M comes to mind, jumped right in, right? Head first, baby. Like we are on board with this way of doing business. Again, maybe a little oversimplification, but I think there is some truth to that. So it is interesting that the Big Ten sort of caught up, right? Like caught up and passed on the in the fast lane there. I also think this, Stu, and I'm wondering, there's a trope in journalism that two's a coincidence, three's a trend. And we had 3 Big Ten teams rattle off national championships, and they're doing well in some other sports too. Frozen Four is this week, and there are 2 Big Ten teams in that, and Michigan could win another national championship. It's the 1 seed in that event in hockey, in men's hockey. So I also do wonder if maybe we are looking at this as a trend, and there's a little bit of it that might just be a coincidence. Now, again, that's pushing back on your column, and sort of saying, hey, we shouldn't have wrote that. But I do find myself thinking like maybe these were singular events more than a trend. Michigan has always been good at basketball, and they hired this great coach. So yeah, Michigan's always had a high ceiling there. Indiana is just a black swan. We've never seen anything like that happen. And UCLA has done very well, especially in women's sports for years, and has always been an athletic program that could pump out high level teams, maybe even though it lagged behind in football. So there's a little bit of me that's tying all these things together, trying to find a through line and wondering if that actually exists.
So a couple things in there. First of all, I always roll my eyes at the notion that the SEC was the only one doing anything under the table all those years, right? That's just such, if anything, there was a period there where like the Big Ten teams were getting in trouble more often than maybe they just weren't as good at hiding it. But the other thing that you mentioned was, yes, in those very early days, 2021, 2022 in particular, you had, it wasn't the Big Ten wasn't alone in this, but they had a lot of schools that were like, oh, I don't know about this. Like Ohio State in particular, Gene Smith was not going to do any of the, collective under the table, not under.
They weren't looking to push the envelope.
No, but I don't think in the end it mattered because the schools like Tennessee and Texas A&M, remember, that ticked off Nick Saban so much, didn't know what they were doing. Yeah, they were throwing money around, but like, hey, it turns out giving a high school quarterback $8 million maybe wasn't the best ROI, right? So once the Big Ten was on board, it was in plenty of time to really, because basically the money shifted to the portal. After about a year, it shifted from high school kids to the portal, and a lot of the Big Ten was on board by then. A lot of the SEC, frankly, didn't have the money yet, and Alabama in particular, like they didn't. The notion that they all had these prosperous collectives, right? Like Tennessee was definitely ahead of the game on that, but not many. The single biggest advantage the SEC had all those years was not moral or ethical or anything like that. It's that these were when rosters were built almost entirely with high school players, and where is the highest concentration of elite 5-star, high 4-star? The South, right? It was the perfect setup for them. Those top teams could hoard elite talent without having to leave their backyard. Once the portal became as prevalent as it did, that advantage is gone. You can get portal kids from anywhere, all over the country. And so that advantage is gone. And obviously the Big Ten has taken advantage of that. But I would, again, get back to it's not as simple as wave a magic wand and we're going to build a national championship roster, right? I mean, the fact that Dusty May basically trotted out all transfers and that most of them weren't even there the year before is remarkable, right? Obviously what Indiana did, what Kurt Signetti did is remarkable. Is this going to last forever? We'll see. Are they going to go on an SEC-like dominance of college football for 15 years? Probably not, but it's not necessarily going to end this year. But, kudos to everybody involved there. They've obviously, look, there was a long period there when Jim Delaney was the commissioner that every year I had to place that call on January 2nd. Jim, how do you explain the Big Ten lost all their bowl games again? They got killed in the BCS championship. How do you explain this? And, obviously the tables have turned.
So the other thing that comes to mind for me when we talk about like the current state of affairs is, again, we have a system that is being jammed into place rather awkwardly with a revenue sharing cap, and we'll see how that holds. And we might talk about that a little bit in the mailbag. And again, I keep using this phrase all the time. We are building the plane while flying it, and it is not, and it's scary, and it doesn't work all the time. But when we talk about that revenue sharing cap, it was $20.5 million this year for all athletes, not just football and basketball players, where the Power Five was able to spend to, and it's going to incrementally go up as budgets go up. There's already talk about getting rid of that cap, and we've talked about how schools are getting around that cap, and LSU certainly seems to be embracing getting around it, but that is not a universally held belief among a lot of SEC schools. I think the Big Ten is looking at that cap and thinking that is a hindrance to us doing business. And I think there are now some SEC schools that maybe think, no, we kind of need a harder cap. Now, again, that's not a blanket statement for each conference. But I do think it's interesting that you hear a little more of like, we need the cap to hold from SEC country than you do from Big Ten country, which sort of gives a nod to, again, this idea of like, who has the money, who's able to deploy the money most effectively. I want to pivot quickly before we throw to a break, and maybe this conversation can continue over to the break. Again, so much is about which conference is better, the SEC or the Big Ten. To pull it away from the money and just sort of look at what's happening on the field. SP Plus ratings came out last week, which is a good way to sort of start the preview season for what next football season is going to look like. Our friend at ESPN, Bill Conley, does them. They've become, I don't know, I would say to a certain degree, the industry standard for, overarching power ranking metrics, right? And if you look at them, what we see is still this, like, there's separation at the top at the Big Ten. I think it's Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State have kind of pulled away, and they're at the very top. But the highest ranked SEC teams, Texas, Georgia, maybe LSU is in there, but I don't even know if they were quite there yet, are about a step below that. But when you get into the middle of the conference, the SEC has a little more sustainability, whereas the Big Ten has a little bit more of a downward dog looking graph. If you plot it out there, like the middle and the bottom is a little worse. Hey, listen, SP Plus is not gospel, but we've talked about this before. Do you see a path for the Big Ten, sticking its chest out in the middle a little bit there and raising its floor, raising its center this year, so it does look a little more comparable to the SEC's depth?
And of course that, I'll answer that, but the whole top versus depth is exactly what the roles used to be reversed, right? The SEC would claim superiority because of what Alabama and Georgia, back to Urban Meyer, Alabama, Florida, and it would be like, but yeah, everybody else is just kind of riding their coattails. I don't know if that was true, but that was the perception, right? So now the tables have turned. I mean, the old Pac-12 for years, they weren't sending teams to the 14 playoff, but look at our top to bottom, look at our parity. I think, look at Illinois, right? They've had a good couple years, no question, under Brett Bielema, and they beat SEC teams in those bowl games. I always say, take those non-CFP bowl results with a bit of a grain of salt, right? In terms of any individual team. But top 20, and nothing else, they had top 25 teams. And yet I don't think Illinois was held with the same kind of respect level as who would you say was their counterpart in the SEC?
Let's say Tennessee or Missouri. The team that they beat in the bowl game is Tennessee.
Yeah, if you were to ask 9 out of 10 college football fans, which team do you think is probably more talented, Illinois or Missouri, Illinois or Tennessee, they would say the SEC teams. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that is the perception. But you would think, as at some point these things become self-fulfilling. And as the Big Ten continues to do as well as they're doing, do the Illinois, Minnesota type teams be able to bring in more players because of that? Like guys who maybe in the past would say, well, I just want to play in the SEC. The SEC is the big leagues. Like, well, I just want to play in the Big Ten. I want to be on national TV every week. I want to, compete for playoff spots. You name it, right? So yeah, I definitely think that's possible. I also think one advantage, obviously Penn State fired James Franklin, total restart there. But the Big Ten has more coaching continuity at this point, right? They have more coaches that have been in one place. I mean, the SEC had 6 coaching changes just this year. It's, you've got Kirby Smart still there, but almost everybody else is, Mark Stoops was the longest tenured. He's not there anymore. That's hard. That's hard to build up. And then, of course, and this is going to be don't you think this is going to become the overwhelming storyline this year when it gets to selection committee time? The SEC is playing 9 games now. Half their teams are going to take another loss. And suddenly some of those teams that were getting ranked decently because they went 10-2 are now going to be 9-3. You can already prepare for that to be a big storyline. But look, we can sit here subjectively, right, and argue this stuff. At the end of the day, the graph you're referring to is based on actual data. And it you showed me that graph, I was like, this visually represents exactly what I thought in my head about the Big Ten's top has caught up and exceeded the SEC's, the middle, not so much.
Okay, so I got to shout out my friend Stats of War, Parker Fleming, who does a lot of great stuff on social media and on X. Go follow him. He was the one who put that plot graph together, and I always bust his chops about how I hate his graphs because they're hard for me to read with my old eyes. But that one really did visualize how everything came together. A couple of quick things. Let me respond to you.
We're going to put that in the show notes, by the way. So if you're interested in seeing that visually, go to the show notes on this episode.
Okay, I need to emphasize your point, the self-fulfilling prophecy of this all, right? I think to a certain degree, the SEC built its empire on that self-fulfilling prophecy. And literally, when you're recruiting kids out of high school, I remember doing stories about this before Texas got to the SEC. Why is Texas struggling and in recruiting, and what's going on in Texas recruiting? And you would literally talk to kids and they'd be like, well, I want to go play in the SEC. That's why I didn't go to Texas. I want to go play in the SEC. One of the reasons why Texas is in the SEC is because there had become this self-fulfilling prophecy where highly rated players simply decided, I want to play in the SEC. And Texas thought it was a disadvantage to not be in the SEC. So that is 100% true. Going back to the money piece of it, maybe we can leave it off here. As the Big Ten continues to weaponize its financials, but some of the mid-tier to lower back-end schools haven't been able to, right? Maybe they're sitting on some debt. They just haven't been able to mobilize at UCLA, at Maryland, at Rutgers. They're trying to. Wisconsin clearly had not completely mobilized. I do wonder if that's the thing that brings some of those schools up now that they are maybe that all that Fox money coming in from the latest TV contract is starting to paper over some of that debt, and they can weaponize some of those funds a little more. So I do wonder when I talk about will the Big Ten be able to match the SEC's depth? We'll get an answer to that over the next couple of years if some of these lower tier schools can invest as much as Missouri seems to have invested, and Ole Miss has invested, and Vanderbilt seems to have invested. The investment is coming from some of the second tier SEC schools. Those schools seemingly are all in, and I think it's lagging a little bit in the Big Ten. When that catches up, then I think football-wise especially, the depth will even out. I think in the other sports it's different, but in football, you need a lot of money to be good at football, a lot more than you need at basketball. So be interesting to see how that plays out, Stu.
If Tony Petitti and the Big Ten, by the way, get their wish to, they're proposing either lifting the salary cap, the House salary cap, or the player retention won't count against it. Like if they succeed in turning it into a soft cap, good luck to everybody else, right? Because those athletic budgets are well equipped to spend well more than $20.3 million per year on athletes. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, some news and notes. All right, some news and notes this week. TCU has given a contract extension to Sunny Dykes. I didn't really think much about it either way, but Ralph has some opinions about it, so I'm going to give him the floor.
Well, I found it an interesting one because Sunny Dykes had the best year one ever, right? I like among the year ones of college football coaches, you could make an argument that Sunny Dykes taking TCU to the national championship game, no matter what that national championship game looked like, and oh boy, was it a problem against Georgia. Oh boy, did it look bad. It is one of the remarkable year ones in the history of college football. They took a major step back in year two. The last 2 years, 9-win seasons at TCU. And you'd think that that's pretty good, right? People should be happy about that, I would think. And I don't know if I get the sense that TCU fans are all in on Sunny Dykes at TCU. And I think there's a little, we've talked about this with some programs in the Big 12, and Kansas State was one that came up, where the new Big 12 presented opportunity for who's going to be the power that's going to rise up here. We are going to lean into, as we talked about before, the depth of the Big 12, and it's crazy, the Big 12, you never know what's going to happen from week to week. But there was also an opportunity for some schools to maybe assert themselves and become the new powers in the Big 12. And I think a lot of people circled maybe TCU and Baylor and Kansas State on the list of who could do that. Now, it's turned out looking a lot more like Texas Tech and BYU when we go back to money and deploying money. So I wonder if what's going on at TCU is a little bit of, I thought that was supposed to be us, and now it's our friends in Lubbock. And what are you doing, Sonny? 9 wins, that's not good enough around here. We're missing this opportunity to assert ourselves. TCU also had the weirdest 9-win season last year because they weren't ranked for most of the year. Then they won a bowl game against USC and they sort of slipped in at the end. I think they were 5-3 at one point, or maybe 6-3 at one point. So I don't know, man. I feel like Sunny Dykes does a pretty good job, and that's a good spot for TCU. But I don't know, Stu. I guess I don't know if that contract extension jives with the vibes in Horned Frog Land.
First of all, one of the best but also worst things you can do is have an amazing first season, because then it just makes everything after it feel like a letdown. But I think it's been back-to-back 9-4 seasons. They've been very quiet 9-4 seasons. They didn't even play a top 25 team in 2024. Last year, they beat number 23 Houston towards the end of the regular season, and then a ranked USC team in the bowl game. But when you think about it, I feel like almost any Like Utah had a quiet 10-win season last year. Like just unfortunately, playing in the new Big 12 where you're just completely overshadowed by the Big 10 and SEC, you don't have a lot of opportunities to have those big national statement wins. In fact, the best win TCU had, arguably, or most visible, was the first game against Belichick because everybody was watching that. I think that's where, nothing gave the fan bases of those kind of teams more satisfaction than beating Oklahoma or Texas. What is the equivalent of that now, right? I guess if you had upset Texas Tech last year, that would be a pretty big deal. So I'm not saying just be happy with what you have necessarily, but I understand the extension. I mean, back-to-back 9-win seasons from a guy who also took you to the national championship game. I'd invest in the guy. Now, maybe I'll regret that in a couple years. I don't know. But all things considered, you're doing pretty well.
Speaking of being happy with what you got, just earlier today, before we started recording, Virginia extended Tony Elliott through 2030. Don't have the contract terms there, but extended Tony Elliott through 2030. Tony Elliott was smack dab on the hot seat last year heading into it. We talked about this the other day, Bruce and I, when we talked about our most fascinating teams heading into our most intriguing teams heading into the season. Virginia is one of mine. Rips off 11 wins, great season, and now you extend him through 2030, which again, good for Tony Elliott, good for Virginia, I think, but it really does sort of go back to this constant so you were thinking about firing him and now we're extending him, Stu?
I feel like schools do this a lot, Ralph, overreact to one good season and then do an extension. And then the next thing you know, he's back on the hot seat and people are like, why did we give him that extension? Maybe Tony Elliott will end up having a great run there, right? It's really hard to say. I would think that if he doesn't, and if things go south, like you said, we don't know the terms of this contract extension, but I can't imagine it's so expensive that they could never get out of it. There is an opportunity there right now in the ACC for somebody to step up and be that consistent program. And obviously, across the state, Virginia Tech fans are feeling like that could be them after hiring James Franklin. But it's not always going to be, Miami's doing great. Florida State and Clemson are in the dumps. There's an opportunity there for somebody to do what Virginia just did on a regular basis. And so maybe it will be Virginia itself.
All right, let's take a little break here and then we'll dig into this week's mailbag coming right up.
All right, it's mailbag time. As always, send your questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com and you can be the lucky recipient of a $16 Trader Joe's gift card. Our first one comes from Scott in Bloomington, Indiana, but no, it is not about the Hoosiers. Scott says the most recent coaching carousel left him wondering about something. The one name he never heard for any Power 4 job was Brian Kelly. Sure, things did not go as planned at LSU, but you cannot deny the success he had at Grand Valley State, Cincinnati, and Notre Dame. Did he somehow become radioactive? Did he say he did not want to coach again and I missed it? Considering the types of coaches that had their issues but still got hired again, Petrino, Freeze, even Kiffin himself, why has Kelly seemingly dropped off the face of the earth?
Yeah, so I don't think it was a radioactive situation here. I think Brian Kelly, you can maybe compare his circumstance to James Franklin a little bit, as to not because they are exactly the same, but the differences might explain why James Franklin is at Virginia Tech and Brian Kelly is sitting out a year. I know it was only a few weeks in between the two were fired, but that's a significant amount of time. James Franklin knew immediately, I want to get back in the business here. There are some open jobs already that look appealing to me, and let's start working on making that a thing. And it ended up that Virginia Tech ended up hiring him, even though it took a while for it to get there. I think when Brian Kelly was fired, it was a little later into October by LSU. The ball was already moving on a lot of searches, right? So now you sort of throw him in there. And really the other thing too is, I know we talked a lot about is Kelly on the hot seat, but it really didn't ramp up at LSU until they lost to Vanderbilt. And even when it happened in sort of a kaboom fashion, right? It was an explosion. It was not a slow burn, even though maybe we were talking about it as that. So he gets fired. A lot of wheels are already in motion for coaching searches. so there was no obvious right spot for where Kelly could be. You have to understand, like, I don't think Brian Kelly was signing up to go to a G6 school. Like, that was not going to happen. I think guys like Brian Kelly want to go in at a sort of an established school where they have the ability to win big. Not a ton of those were open. And also, from my reporting and a little bit of reporting, a little bit of smart speculation, like, I don't think he was aggressively looking to get back in. And you need to be aggressively looking to get back in with these things. I think you have to really say, like, I want another job. Go find me one, my agent. So I don't think it was a matter of him being radioactive. I think it was partially timing, partially like what was available for him to get involved with, and nothing necessarily being a perfect fit. So I think that there was my sense of it, there was a little bit of acknowledgement from him that, like, gonna sit out unless the perfect thing falls into my lap and somebody comes looking for me. Comfortable with sitting out a year, comfortable with collecting my $54 million in buyout money. And then we'll see what happens this year. I am very interested to see what kind of a name Brian Kelly is around this year's coaching carousel. My suspicion is he will be a lot more in play, but then again, it becomes where he's a right fit and where his ego feels like is a good spot for him to land.
I mean, I think he's going to have to check the ego a little bit. He is not going to get a job. Let's just be realistic, right? He's not going to be, if USC and Lincoln Riley go their separate ways, he's not going to be hired as the next coach at USC. But could you see him being the next coach at Maryland? Like a program in that tier, not national, or, like James Franklin, we all think got a pretty good landing spot at Virginia Tech, right? Not a blue blood, but a program that has shown it can contend for ACC championships and win ACC championships. I don't even necessarily think that's going to be, look, he's not radioactive, but let's be honest. His personality is not for everybody. And some of the red-faced, snapping at the reporter, that kind of stuff is fine when you're winning. But if you're not, like, people aren't as accepting of it. So that's got to play a factor, or maybe, make it so that it's not going to be every Power 4 school with an opening fighting over him.
Yeah, he is 64 years old. James Franklin is in his mid-50s. That's a different element there too. Again, I would be surprised if we don't see Brian Kelly in another college football job at some point, but some different factors at play. Michigan State was one last year that I thought maybe, but again, like, it just seemed like things had moved along there. It just seemed like when he entered the job market, a lot of things were already in motion, and who else was going to be in the market and where some searches were thinking about going and heading towards. And the timing wasn't great for him. But again, I would be shocked if he's not in this job market. Okay, the next question, I'll go to you and set you up on this one, Stu. And it says, the fate of Nebraska, and it comes from Kelly J. King, who is clearly a Nebraska football fan. I wonder if the recent clearinghouse arbitration may damage the Nebraska football program significantly. Just a little background, right? Nebraska is expected to go to arbitration over how it is providing some NIL money to a bunch of football players. It's going through an MMR deal. The CSC says, no, that doesn't pass clearinghouse muster. And the way they resolve this is Nebraska and the players go to arbitration, and an arbiter will rule if the CSC is indeed applying the rules appropriately. All right. Do we got all that? Did I get all that down? But to go a little deeper, if the ruling is against our players, and this is coming from a Nebraska fan, does that potentially destroy the roster in place? Does that thereby destroy the season? Does this essentially mean the death penalty for the Cornhuskers, as they have seemingly been the test case for this? If the CSC wins, does it then just destroy the ability for teams to continue this type of payment and therefore make the gap larger between the haves and the have-nots? Help from Kelly. First of all, I take big issue with Nebraska being considered a have-not. I don't know if they've deployed their funds as well as other schools, but I take a little bit of an issue with Nebraska being deemed a have-not. Stu, can you sort of walk us through this arbitration case that had a chance to be very important, but is not even, I don't think, scheduled yet? We're talking maybe the end of April, early May.
Yeah. Well, this is all uncharted territory. We're all going through this for the first time. This is the first major situation where I think it's like $10 million worth of deals are in the balance, hanging in limbo because the CSC rejected them. It is the players themselves that are going to arbitration, but Nebraska is very much behind them. I think help them get lawyers and all that good stuff. So the way, in theory, it would work is if CSC ruled, or I'm sorry, if the arbitrator ruled that the CSC's ruling was correct, then those players either have to give the money back, or if they've received any, or they're ineligible. And of course, in theory, that would be just complete chaos because you promised these kids all this money to come here. What are you supposed to do? Tell them sorry, we didn't get it cleared. And the reason it's so significant is Nebraska is not the only one that did this. There's lots of teams out there that promised money to these guys to get them to come without having actually gotten any deals approved yet. So big ripple effect for everybody. But I don't think this process is like when you say essentially the death penalty, you're talking about the NCAA coming and busting down the doors and busting Nebraska for doing something against the rules. This is more about just straight up, are these players' deals valid or not? And if they're not, well, I'm sorry, they can't be paid. But I think we all strongly suspect that if that happens, if the arbitration goes against these Nebraska players, somebody's going to sue. It won't be the Nebraska players themselves because they are part of the House settlement, which means they have waived their right to sue. That's why they're in arbitration here. But it could be, first of all, it could be Playfly, right? The company that is being dinged here. Or it could be state attorney general, as we often see. This is going to be one way or the other a big moment for whether, frankly, this entire system they set up after the House settlement to monitor third-party NIL deals, whether it's ever actually going to stick. Do I have that right, Ralph?
I think, yes, it's definitely an important potential ruling, potential legal action coming up to figure out like exactly where this whole thing is going. I would also say this. I would be very surprised if Nebraska, somewhere in the boardrooms and meeting rooms of Nebraska, there aren't people saying, okay, if the ruling goes against us, how do we pay these guys? How do we try again to pay these guys? Like what it's because again, like the money is sort of there, but it's the way we're getting the money to these athletes that is being scrutinized. And I think there is a bit of trial and error going on all over college sports right now, trying to determine, does this pass the rules? Does this pass the test? Well, maybe we should try it this way. Maybe we can try it this way. So I would be very surprised if there isn't a plan B and plan C. Now, plan B and plan C might not be above board either. And maybe eventually that has to be arbitrated as well. So I think you're right, Stu. I think what the immediate next step might be some kind of lawsuit, but I also think there's a possibility of let's take another swing at this and figure out a different way that we can get this money to these guys. Maybe I'm being naive there, and maybe it is this ominous cloud hanging over Nebraska's season, and all of a sudden they're going to be without 15 players or 10 players or something like that. I'm a little skeptical of that. I feel like this is more about process and rules and bureaucracy than it is something that is going to gut Nebraska's football team. But we are, as you said, uncharted waters. We will see.
It's been very hard to write any of this stuff about CSC and NIL Go in a digestible format. I can't tell you guys how much behind the stuff we hear behind the scenes about this is like too complicated for even me to understand, much less as a general reading public. But it is significant. And what I've ascertained at this point about this most recent portal cycle is basically not everybody, but certainly schools that are trying to go to the playoff and outspend their opponents, is they just said, this is our payroll. We're going to spend it and we're going to figure out how it gets through later. Like nobody had a real good, solid plan. It was just, we'll just try it. Like, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else and we'll deal with it later. So we'll see how that was. Well, I don't know. I've never been very confident that this system was going to fly, and nothing has really changed my opinion about that.
Yeah, one last thing on the CSC, just behind the scenes inside baseball. So we got a memo that they distributed, the CSC distributed to membership, right? To sort of say, hey, now that the basketball portal's open, here's some reminders and some guidance. And there are all these terms in there that are important. They are important for us to know. As the people who are reporting this, it is important for us to understand what is going on. But it was like, this means this. And if you say a facilitator, it means this. And here's what an associated entity means. And here's what, and it's just like within a couple of pages, your head is just spinning. But again, it's very important for us to understand it. I don't know how much is important for fans to understand it, but we'll do the best we can, or we'll do the best we can to make it digestible so you can understand how it impacts your running back room. All right, next question goes to Stu, and it has to do with how you evaluate record against ranked teams. He said, guys, when evaluating teams, say for a playoff berth, opponents' rankings at the end of the season are generally used. And that's true, right? Because if you're ranked at the time, that might not matter that much. But Stu, in your recent story, which refers to Jeff Brom's record since 2018 as 5-4 against top 10 teams, that record is ranking at the time of those games, right? So Matt in Champaign, Illinois, did the work for us, and he adjusted some things, and he shows that like while 5-4 might have been Brom's record at the time of those games against ranked teams, if you look at the end of the season rankings, against top 10 teams, if you look at the end of season rankings, his record is only 2-3 against top 10 teams. So Stu, why do we use ranked records one way, maybe for evaluating teams, but a different way for evaluating coaches?
Okay, so I have a couple thoughts on this. One is that they're two different things, right? We get to the end of the season, we're trying to figure out who should be in the playoff. We're trying to figure out who the best teams were in that season. That feels different to me than evaluating a coach's career accomplishments. For instance, some of those games where Jeff Brom beat a team in the top 10 at the time that didn't finish the top 10 because Jeff Brom beat them and knocked them out of the top 10, right? So shouldn't there be some credit there? But I also think you alluded to it, like there's no easy way to reassemble. If you're looking at, Jeff Brom hasn't been the head coach, but if I was like, what's Kirk Ferentz's record against teams that finished in the top 25? There's no easy sortable place to do that. Now, I will say, we might soon, right? As when these AI, Chat GPT and Gemini and whatnot get a little more accurate, I actually probably could say, tell me Jeff Brom's record against teams that finish in the top 25, and it would give that to me in 30 seconds. It's just not reliable enough yet, and I'll give you some very fresh examples. When we had that mailbag question a few weeks ago about guys from the past who would have benefited most from the portal, and we were starting to talk about, famous group of 5 players. While we were on the podcast, I asked AI to give me a list of all the group of 5 players who finished in the top 10 in the Heisman. And it did that in like 20 seconds and informed my discussion. That was a good example. A bad example just this week would be that column that we talked about the Big Ten winning national titles. They've won some other ones too already, right? Like women's lacrosse and a few others. And so I asked it to give me a list of all the NCAA national champions this year, and it gave me the list, and I looked at it and said, I know for a fact Nebraska didn't win the volleyball championship because I remember when they got upset. I didn't remember who had won instead. It was Texas A&M. So they're not entirely accurate yet. So I wouldn't necessarily want to have them do that for me for Jeff Brom's record and then take it as gospel. So that means I'd have to then go back and reassemble it myself again. But hopefully soon, one day, we can do that, and then we would just have to somehow make it industry standard, which that in itself would not be easy.
Yeah. So Matt did the research here for you, and he, again, we appreciate that. But here's my overarching point on this. It's too much. I don't need that. Like the level of precision and the distinction that you're making, I'm not sure is enough to make me change my mind on how good Jeff Brom is as a coach, because Michigan State finished number 12 and not in the top 10, right? I think that's the reason why we get so, frankly, I think we get too hung up on some of these numbers, and then it becomes false precision, as if like, the 2 and 3 is so much more different. It's so much different. Like that's a completely different evaluation if he's 2 and 3 against top 10 teams instead of 5 and 4. I think sometimes we get a little too hung up on that stuff. So while we appreciate the work Matt and Champagne did to sort that out, I don't know if it's changing my mind about Jeff Brom and other coaches that much. I think we get a little, again, what I would like to call false precision there.
All right, real quick, I got one for you, Ralph, because it was aimed specifically at you. It literally says, question for Ralph from John Fensel. Thanks for your insights, and thank you for insights. Okay. Thank you for insights you and the rest of the team provide on college football. Reason for the quick note: in the April 7th pod, you talked about your apartment issues and you not getting to catch up on some music docs. That was the internet issues. I'm a big doc guy and always looking for new ones. Would you care to share the music docs you were hoping to watch?
Sure. Like I think personally, Stu, you and I 1 week should just have a music episode, because your taste and my taste overlap a fair amount. Actually, I don't want to not include Bruce, because I like some of Bruce's music too. It's just that you and I definitely.
Are you kidding me? We can't include Bruce. His musical taste could not be more opposite. We would have nothing in common to talk to him about.
I don't necessarily, I'm not 100% sure of that. I think I'm a little more open-minded, and my taste is a little broader than yours. But yours and you and me, like if there's a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap there. And I like bringing in Bruce to this too. But yeah, you're right. I think we should do a music episode. So the one I was particularly looking to watch this past weekend that I actually ended up being able to squeeze in at the end of the week when I finally got some internet back was one called "It's Never Over," and it's about Jeff Buckley, who is a great singer-songwriter from the early mid-1990s, who died very young. It's very sad. A lot of music documentaries ends up being very sad because they end up being about people who died young. I recently watched one on Nirvana, which is about 10 years old, which was amazing. But Jeff Buckley was this like phenomenal singer-songwriter who has one studio album, and it's called Grace, and it is freaking phenomenal. It is one of the best albums ever. Could I say ever in my lifetime? Anyway, I managed to watch this one. It was really good. It lived up to the billing. And frankly, it's like part of a series that I discovered that Bill Simmons is behind. It's called Music Box. It's HBO docs. And I'm probably going to dive into a couple more. In fact, I just started yesterday, and I have to finish it maybe later today, one on Alanis Morissette, who again is like was a phenom in the mid-90s and had one incredible album, had a few more after that, but one incredible album. And that one's pretty interesting too. Obviously not as sad because she's not dead, very much alive and well and seems to be prospering. But like, here's my shout out to everybody. If you like music documentaries, send the recommendations my way. We might not mention it on the show, but I will definitely be on the lookout for them, and I'll definitely try to read them. Billy Joel documentary was really good. I saw that recently. Again, the Nirvana one, this Jeff Buckley one. I've got, there's a relatively new one from Led Zeppelin that was in theaters that I saw that I might go back and rewatch. So it's a recent thing for me. Like the last year and a half, I've suddenly gotten into these music documentaries, and any suggestions I will take.
I tried to watch the Nirvana one you talked about, and it just made me too sad to see all these videos of cute, innocent little Kurt Cobain at his birthday party, and knowing how it's going to end was really hard. But I'll give you one that I would strongly recommend, and that is, these Sony streaming services, I don't remember where I saw this. You can Google it and find it. The one on the making of We Are the World. just the footage they had. Have you seen this?
I have seen that.
The footage they had of everybody in the studio, they basically pulled an all-nighter to record that song. And it's just like a who's who of that moment in music in the mid-'80s, but also like such a random assortment of people, right? Like you got, kind of obvious, right? Michael Jackson and Huey Lewis and then Bob Dylan. What's he doing in there? Like, wasn't one of the blues, Jan Aykroyd was in it. Like one of the Blues Brothers was in it. Like, how did they come up with that pairing, right? So that was really fascinating. And it's not like I'd even thought about We Are the World in 40 years. But yeah, nice insight there. This is going to be a tough one to decide who gets the Trader Joe's gift card today, Ralph.
Yeah. And it's, by the way, The Greatest Night in Pop is the title of that documentary. I would go with, this is a tough one. I'm going to go with, I feel like the Nebraska question from Kelly J. King was maybe not the most like, what's the word I'm looking for here? It was kind of we need to give people their medicine every once in a while, right? Like you need to eat your vegetables. So you need to hear what this is about. You need to understand the CSC. You need to hear some of this legalese because folks, eventually it's going to impact your school too. So I'm going to go with Kelly J. King because he gave us an opportunity to educate our fine listeners as much as they may not want it.
So, not to make this difficult, but I'm going with Matt in Champaign just because he did so much research for that question about the top 5 at the time. I mean, he clearly put a lot of work into this. There's even like literally a chart, a color-coded chart. So just for the effort, I'm going to go with that. So now we go to the tiebreaker vote. Our producer, Matt.
All right, guys. You're right. This was a very tightly contested mailbag. I think everyone's deserving. I'm going to go with, from those two choices, I'm going to agree with Stu and go Matt. Not because of the name, but because I like when people go sicko mode and look into the esoteric stats like this. So not to encourage a bunch of like ramblings in the mailbag, but I do think this was a really, really well done one. This really struck the balance. So congrats to Matt.
What have we done? Next week's mailbag is just people are going to be sending these. My favorites are always I've solved the playoff problem. Here's my 36-part proposal for an expanded playoff.
Some of those are fun though. And I'm actually got Matt. I'm glad you picked Matt because in retrospect, as Stu was explaining it, I found myself thinking, I think I picked the wrong one here. No offense, Kelly, but I thought I found myself almost wanting to backtrack. When you put that much work into it, and we do appreciate Matt's research there, maybe we can use you as the official researcher of the Audible Pod. The job pays nothing, by the way. But yeah, no, I'm happy to go with Matt there and him winning the $16 Audible, Trader Joe's gift card.
So Matt, send your mailing address to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Everybody else, send your questions for next week's episode to theaudiblepod@gmail.com, and we'll see you next time.